The mighty oak. Solid as a rock. Symbol of strength. Honesty and solid character. Longevity and endurance. And to the ancient Greeks, the power of Zeus. Its timbers have long sailed the seas. Animal hides were tanned with its bark. Its acorns ground into flour. Its wood is strong enough to frame the hulls of great ships. Oaks were hand-hewn into timber frames. Oak was the wood of choice for barrels and kegs, the storage containers of early days. Water-powered sawmills made the labor of producing oak timbers much easier. Uniform sizes became available for houses, barns, and bridges. Railroad ties were sawn by the millions. Oak has provided sturdy furnishings for centuries. In the 1600s, the Massachusetts colony featured an oak on the shilling. In 1687, rebellious locals hid the Connecticut Charter document in a hollow oak tree to avoid having it repealed by a British governor. The charter oak stood until 1856. Nearly 100 species of animals eat its acorns. In spring, when day length reaches 13 hours, oak leaf and flower buds begin to swell and open. Small, pollen-producing male flowers are arranged in dangling catkins. Tiny leaves that were packed into buds expand and fill out. The male flowers mature, and breezy spring days blow clouds of oak pollen across the landscape, some of which finds its way to inconspicuous, minuscule female flowers that few people ever notice. They're the beginnings of the tree's fruit, acorns. There are about 450 species of oak worldwide, some 90 or so in the United States. 12 are native to New England. They become more obvious in the fall, being some of the last to drop their leaves, sometimes not until late winter. The oaks fall into two groups, the white oak group, whose leaves have rounded lobes, and the red oak group, which has bristle-tipped lobes. The bristles are the extension of veins. In New England, probably the most well-known species in the white oak group is the eastern white oak. It occurs in each New England state. Mature white oaks have vertical bark furrows and flattened ridges. On saplings, the bark is smooth, soon changing to flat, scaly strips. The loose ends of bark strips eventually slough off, leaving a more blocky appearance. The younger upper trunk and limbs retain the strips until much older. The white oak, of course, has the rounded leaf lobes characteristic of its group. Sinuses between lobes are deep on leaves exposed to the sun, but leaves in shade tend to have shallow sinuses to maximize photosynthetic surface area. Acorns have a shallow cap and are longer than wide. Buds are bluntly rounded, without the fine hairs that some other species have. Gnarly, contorted old white oaks have long been revered. Such open-grown oaks can live hundreds of years, becoming massive old landmarks, like this roadside Connecticut tree with ponderous limbs that rest on the ground. The limb spread of this ancient monarch is 120 feet. That's the distance of the Wright brothers' first flight at Kitty Hawk. The trunk measures just under 21 feet in circumference. Trees like this would have been thought of as sacred to many early civilizations. Native Americans often held council under such notable spreading trees. Oak was so essential to early humans that the term druid meant oak knowledge. Farmers of yesteryear left lone oaks in their pastures to shade livestock. These open-grown trees featured low, wide-spreading limbs and short, thick trunks. Another in the white oak group is the swamp white oak, a species usually found in moist bottomlands. Its young bark is similar to the eastern white oak, but gets more distinctly furrowed and ridged with age. Younger trees can look messy, cluttered with small branches. The small branches have papery, flaking bark. Leaves are often glossy on the upper surface. They have rounded lobes and very shallow sinuses. Leaves are widest near the middle. Acorns grow on short stalks, either singly or in pairs. The acorn cap has a bumpy texture and often covers half the acorn. Buds are small and rounded. An oak with a similar leaf is the chestnut oak. Its leaves tend to narrow down to more of a pointy tip than the broader swamp white oak. Chestnut oaks are found on dry upland slopes and ridgetops, not moist bottomlands like swamp whites. Bark becomes deeply furrowed and coarsely rugged looking. Young chestnut oak bark is fairly smooth, but soon builds into thick layers. Why is it called chestnut oak? Because its leaves also resemble those of American chestnut. But American chestnut leaves tend to be longer and have pointed teeth. Acorns are long and have stalks. Buds are relatively long and pointed, with no hairs. This old chestnut oak has died, but it has left plenty of offspring, sprouted from its acorns. And this is one of the two oldest known chestnut oaks. At approximately 450 years old, it dates back to the 1570s. Its rugged bark was shed long ago and is now smooth again. One of the grandest of all oak species is this, the bur oak. It's chiefly a Midwestern species and is uncommon or rare in New England, found mostly in far western New England and central Maine. In New England, bur oak is found mostly in the neutral or alkaline soils of rich, moist bottomlands. When young, bur oak bark resembles the eastern white oak. Bark on older trees becomes furrowed with flattened ridges, similar to swamp white oak. Like white oak, bark on upper trunk and limbs is in flaky strips. Younger branches have corky bark ridges. Bur oaks are adapted to prairie life and are intolerant of shade. They can reach massive proportions when open grown and live hundreds of years. Leaves have rounded lobes and typically very deep sinuses below the middle. Buds are small and rounded and can have grayish, fuzzy hairs. Besides leaves, another distinctive feature is the acorn. In New England, they're not unusually large, but the cup often covers a significant portion of the nut and has a notably fringed edge. In southern parts of its range, bur oak produces the largest acorns of all native oaks, up to golf ball size. The next species in the white oak group is the chinkapin oak, sometimes called yellow oak. Leaves of chinkapin oak resemble those of chestnut oak, and its bark is similar to the eastern white oaks. Leaves have rounded lobe tips and can be confused with chestnut oak. But a peculiarity of the chinkapin oak's leaves is that their lobes have tiny glandular tips, which may help control water loss. Chestnut oak leaves do not have these glands. Acorns are longer than wide and have short stalks. Outside of New England, chinkapin oaks can get quite large. In extreme southern New England can be found post oak. Post oaks are small members of the white oak group, never attaining great size. They could easily be mistaken for young white oaks, but fortunately have a distinctive leaf shape, like a Maltese cross. They of course have rounded lobe tips, and yes, they can vary in shape just to keep us on our toes. Acorns are small, about 3/4 inches long or less. Buds are broadly conical and dark cinnamon brown. In dry scrublands and pitch pine barrens, the last and the smallest member of New England's white oak group can be found. The dwarf chinkapin oak, also known as the dwarf chestnut oak. While the larger chinkapin oak prefers rich alkaline soils, the dwarf chinkapin is found mostly in dry, acidic soils. It sometimes forms clonal groups, spreading by underground rhizomes. Its leaves resemble those of chinkapin oak, but are smaller. It's always a shrub, typically about 3 to 12 feet in height, although it can occasionally be larger, topping out at 20 feet or so. Like the chinkapin oak, the dwarf species has glandular tips on its rounded leaf lobes. Acorns are only 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch long. New England's red oak group present the most identification challenges, even for professionals. Often growing alongside dwarf chinkapin oak in the same kind of dry habitat, we find the first and smallest member of the red oak group, a shrub known as bare oak or scrub oak. Bare oak is always a shrub. The shape of its leaves is reminiscent of holly leaves. They have the bristle-tipped lobes characteristic of the red oak group. Tiny acorns are relished by deer, bears, flying squirrels, and turkeys. Buds and twigs are covered with a dense, fuzzy growth of hairs. Bare oak is intolerant of shade and depends on fires to keep it exposed to sun. It can form dense, impenetrable thickets that are important cover for many bird, reptile, and mammal species. Bare oak is the smallest New England member of the red oak group, but at the other end of the spectrum is one of the most common, the northern red oak. Growing tall and straight, northern red oak is highly valuable both economically and ecologically. It's not only an important timber tree, its foliage and acorns also feed large numbers of animal life, from moths to moose, butterflies to bears. A stand of tall red oaks can be quite handsome. Red oak bark has long, flat, parallel ridges that many refer to as ski tracks that run vertically up the trunk. They're evident beginning on young trees and develop into deeper linear furrows with age. The pattern continues and remains evident with more age. At about 200 years of age, it looks like this. The furrows can be even deeper. Somewhere in its 3rd century, the bark may begin shedding its old, thick layers, resulting in irregular patches of thinner bark known as balding. Until at around 300 years, the outer bark has shed enough to start looking comparatively smoother again. And these two trees, growing on a Massachusetts mountain, are the oldest known northern red oaks anywhere in the world. Though they're not huge trees, they are the oldest of their species, now just under 350 years old. A mature oak forest can be inviting any time of year, but especially in autumn, when the fragrance of newly fallen leaves accentuates the crisp air, and dark tree trunks rise through fluorescent foliage. A big spreading oak always enhances a streamside visit. Even in the starkness of winter, they silently stand, proud and strong. Northern red oak leaves have the bristle-tipped lobes characteristic of the red oak group. Their shape can vary widely. Seedling leaves can be oval and lack sinuses. Shade leaves are broad with shallow sinuses. Sun leaves are more deeply cut. Sometimes the leaf stalk or petiole is red, but not always. Acorns are about as wide as they are long, with a very shallow cap. Long, pointy buds may or may not have some hairs on the outer half. By foliage alone, it would be very easy to confuse northern red oak with this species, the black oak. Black oaks don't have the long, flat, parallel ski track pattern seen on northern red oak. An irregular, narrow ridge pattern begins on young black oaks. The narrow ridges become more compact with age, often breaking up into a blocky bark pattern which appears well up into the crown. Large old black oaks can also be mistaken for white oaks, often attaining a lighter gray bark. This very old black oak has balding bark on the lower trunk. As in all red oaks, the leaves are pointy with bristle tips. They are often more glossy than northern red oak leaves, but similarly shaped. Early in the season, black oak leaves tend to have hairs along the petiole and onto the leaf surface underneath. Whereas northern red oak leaves may or may not have hairs where side veins meet the midvein, but not along the petiole. Especially in the upper crown, black oak buds are covered with whitish hairs along their entire length. Red oak buds may have some hairs, but only on the upper half and none on the lower half. Black oak buds are strongly five-angled in cross-section, where red oak buds lack strong angles. Acorn caps are noticeably fringed at the edge, like loose roof shingles, and the cap covers half or more of the nut, unlike the red oak. The next red group species is scarlet oak. Young scarlet oak often develops broken bark ridges reminiscent of black oak. The ridges develop with age, so in younger trees are prominent at the base, but haven't yet appeared on the younger upper trunk. Bark on young upper limbs is smooth. On older scarlet oaks, the bark has developed ridges and furrows much farther up the trunk. but fairly smooth bark can still be seen on younger limbs in the crown. Scarlet oaks tend to have drooping lower branches and retain small, cluttered branches for a long time. Leaves vary, but sun leaves have very deep sinuses. The sinuses often form a closing C shape. Telling scarlet oak from black oak is probably best done with acorns. Scarlet acorn caps cover about half the nut and have a somewhat glossy surface. Some have a unique characteristic, a ring of tiny indentations at the tip. Scarlet cap scales are pressed down tightly. Black oak scales look more like roof shingles and have the fringed edge. Buds are oval, sometimes five-angled, with hairs from the tip down, but not at the base. Typically associated with rivers and floodplains is the pin oak. Pin oak leaves are easily confused with those of scarlet oak. One of the most prominent characteristics on pin oak is its smooth bark, which it maintains for many years. Eventually, it does develop shallow, scaly ridges, but is still much smoother looking than other oaks, even when it reaches massive proportions. Lower branches have a descending angle more pronounced than scarlet oaks. Pin oak can look cluttered because it retains many small dead branches for years, reminiscent of a pin cushion. Its bristle-tipped leaves have very deep U-shaped sinuses, where sinuses of scarlet oak are more C-shaped. Acorns are small and striped. Buds are small, about 1/8 inch long, pointed, sometimes with angled sides, and hairs only at the tip. Oaks can send pollen far and wide on the wind, and freely hybridize within their respective white and red groups, resulting in an exasperating mix of characteristics that complicate our attempts to identify distinct species. One of the easiest oak hybrids to identify is one between white oak and chestnut oak. Mix their genes and you get a hybrid known as Saul's oak, whose leaves vary and don't look exactly like either parent, but are distinctive. But the bark can look like white oak, or more like a chestnut oak. Another hybrid is Chouette's oak, between bur oak and swamp white oak. Mix their genes and you get a leaf like this. Virtually every species within the white oak group is known to hybridize with the others, though most hybrids may not be particularly obvious. All the red oaks hybridize within their group as well, creating a blurry and confusing mix of characteristics in sites with multiple species, to the great frustration of those trying to put a label on them. But this widespread mixing of genes probably serves the oaks well, increasing their ability to adapt to different conditions. A magnified look at the end grain of red oak shows large open pores formed in the early wood, which is the springtime growth of each annual ring. As the season progresses, late wood growth produces much smaller pores. The large pores are like tiny straws, and you could blow air through a piece of red oak several feet long. White oak wood is similar, but the early wood pores are blocked by structures called tyloses. That's why only wood from the white oak group is used for kegs that hold liquids. Kegs made of red oak would leak. Historically, oak was the wood of choice for making charcoal. Stacks of oak were covered with soil and smoldered for many hours to reduce the wood to carbon. The process began with the vertical piling of wood. The pile was covered with sod, soil, or sand. A small fire was started in the center of the pile. Oxygen had to be carefully restricted from the fire, so the wood could only smolder at a slow, controlled rate. The sand was watered down. A worker periodically checked the charcoal production. This is a rare surviving charcoal kiln, last fired in 1965. It was built of bricks and would take about 90 cords of wood at a time. Once wood was loaded, large steel doors were closed. Small vent holes around the base controlled the air intake. The brickwork of the domed roof is just masterful workmanship. The interior is about 30 feet in diameter and perhaps 20 feet high. Autumn has arrived, and the oaks are about to shed their seeds. White oak species mature their acorns in one growing season, but red oak species require 2 growing seasons to mature theirs. The entire crop of seeds produced by forest trees and shrubs is known as mast. The crop varies from year to year in boom and bust cycles. Somehow, oaks over a vast area are able to synchronize their acorn production in what is called a mast year. 2019 was a mast year, when oaks from New England to Georgia produced an enormous crop of acorns. A mast year produces far more seeds than wildlife can consume, thereby ensuring that at least some seeds will get to germinate. It also results in a population boom the following year for the seed eaters. But then there will be years with little seed production, causing a decline in seed predator populations. In this way, trees regulate the seed predators. If seed production was constant year after year, predators would likely consume virtually all the seeds. It starts slowly. An acorn here and there. Breezes shake more acorns loose. But every so often, things can get a bit more intense. Most acorns are eaten by wildlife. They can quickly tell good ones from bad. Porcupines fatten up on acorns for the coming winter. Flying squirrels spend nights feeding on them too. Trees with wind-blown seeds, such as cottonwoods, can quickly colonize new areas to increase their range. But large, heavy seeds like acorns fall within yards of the tree. When glaciers receded from New England thousands of years ago, oaks moved into the region far quicker than would be expected. How did they move north so quickly? We know squirrels and chipmunks bury acorns, but they don't stash them very far from the tree. Without some other means of transport, most of New England would still be a northern species forest, without oaks for many thousands of years. One likely explanation is this. A blue jay can carry about 5 small acorns in its throat, mouth, and bill. It flies up to 1.5 miles, dumps them, then buries them. This jay is plucking acorns from a pin oak tree. It flies out of sight and returns for more several minutes later. But many acorns that don't get eaten still don't get a chance to germinate. Cut one open and you may find a resident. This is the larva of an acorn weevil. An adult weevil chewed a hole in a developing acorn and laid an egg in it. The larva grows as it feeds on the acorn flesh. When the acorn falls, the larva is ready to chew its way out. The adult female weevil lays around 50 eggs in her lifetime. A large percentage of acorns may be parasitized by weevils, which themselves are preyed upon by wasps. The larva squeezes out of its exit hole. A colony of tiny temnothorax ants may now use the empty acorn as their own nesting site. The larva now burrows into the soil, where it will remain for about 2 years before emerging as an adult, if it isn't eaten first. Acorns in the red oak group mature and drop in their second season, and sprout in the following spring. But acorns in the white oak group mature in one season, and some species immediately sprout a taproot in the fall, before winter arrives. Come spring, with taproot already established, growth takes off. The root grows downward with the pull of gravity, while the shoot grows upward against the pull of gravity. Other nearby acorns are sinking roots too. This is how oaks begin life. One of the things that can end the life of an oak and many other trees is this: the non-native gypsy moth, now known as the spongy moth. Females are larger than males and do not fly. Males seeking to mate with them are attracted by pheromones. There may be many thousands of them in an oak stand. As adults, their only mission is to reproduce. The female lays one mass of eggs, one at a time. They're covered in a matrix of hair-like fibers. Tree trunks may be covered with scores or hundreds of egg masses, each containing up to 1,000 eggs. The adults die after mating and egg laying. Eggs hatch in the following spring. The caterpillar's voracious feeding can defoliate trees, which may leaf out again. Trees can usually survive several repeat defoliations, but beyond that, they die. In early summer, the caterpillars pupate before emerging as adults. How are acorns, gypsy moths, and mice related? Biologist Jeff Bettner tells the story.
Today, the red oaks and the white oaks have basically started to replace what the American chestnut used to do. And the American chestnut was great because it produced a nut crop every single year. And that was really important for small mammals, for deer, for everything to wild turkey, blue jays. The whole forest basically depended on a system of American chestnut. So when chestnut disappeared, red oak and white oak had to kind of take that place. It was always there, but now it really got a chance to thrive. A tree like this could probably produce 5,000 to 10,000 acorns in a single season. That's a huge production for small mammals, for all the wildlife. In the spring, the pollen that you see is not for this fall's crop, but actually for 2 years from now's crop. So the tree is constantly carrying last year's acorns and this year's acorns, and it will mature those depending on how the season goes. If it's a really dry year, it may abort one of those year's crops, or it may hang on to both and try to make it. We've measured in parts of western Massachusetts up to 200,000 acorns per hectare, which is almost 100,000 acorns per acre over the entire landscape in a single year, and that's just a phenomenal crop for all the wildlife. So the red oak group is actually really important. The white oak is really important in a different way, in that the pollen that is produced in the spring is that fall's acorn crop. And so the weather that occurs during that season will affect that fall's crop. And then the next year it will start all over again. So having a really diverse forest with red oaks, black oaks, white oaks, so that you get masting each year helps to account for giving small mammals a real chance. If you didn't have different species within the forest, and you also have all your hickories and other things that are adding to that mast crop as well, if you were just depending on any one of these trees, they can completely fail, go from 200,000 acorns to 2,000 acorns in a single year. And so that's just devastating for populations that built up to the high numbers of acorns and then have to immediately collapse the following year. So the white-footed mice are basically using that acorn crop to get through the winter. Without it, they really can't survive. And you will see small mammal populations that go from 2 mice per hectare to 200 mice per hectare, again, in just a single season, because if you have a good mast crop, the mice will eat those acorns into December, and they will keep reproducing into December. So they will have a new generation every 35 days. And they can build up huge populations in a single winter. When you get up to the numbers like 200 mice per hectare, that means that you've got a pair of mice covering about every 15 or 20 trees, and they're going up those trees every single night and going on almost every single branch every night. So they really don't miss much. They're going to eat most of the caterpillars, most of the beetles, most of anything they can find. And so because of that, these guys are really great. They love gypsy moth, and so they will eat a tremendous number of gypsy moth in a single season. They will also eat the gypsy moth pupae as they're getting ready just before the gypsy moth emerges from the puparia. And so that's really important. So we've done studies where we put out hundreds and hundreds of pupae in the forest and then come back and found that these guys ate 80–90% of it within 3 days. And the pupae have to be out there for almost 10 days. So it means that they're literally almost keeping the gypsy moth population completely annihilated at low densities of gypsy moth. So they can really maintain a population and keep it very stable. However, if the acorn crop fails and then the mouse population fails the next year, and maybe you get a drought, gypsy moth does extremely well. And gypsy moth can increase 100-fold in a single year. And so it can expand to a place where the mouse population can't handle all the pupae that are out there, all the caterpillars that are out there, and it takes them a while to try and catch up. And so the gypsy moth will basically get ahead of the mice, and that's when you get an outbreak in the population. This is actually really a keystone species to keeping a lot of insects in check. We'd have a lot more outbreaks without this guy. The drawback, too, is they also carry ticks and Lyme disease, so when you have huge numbers of mice, you also have to worry a little bit about how many ticks you have in the forest. But for the most part, it's really an important species in the forest, and it feeds an awful lot of big predators as well. This is a botfly called Cuterebra fontanella, and it's species specific pretty much for getting into the groin of white-footed mice. And there are different species of mice, and they have different species of botflies, and so there's quite a number. But so this one can live in a lot of different things. So the botfly is actually this little lump underneath the skin, and all you can see here is where the waste is basically going to come out of that botfly. Its mouth parts are actually at the other end, and they're feeding on blood and tissue inside. They're just basically right under the surface of the skin, so it really doesn't bother the mouse as much as it looks like it's really horrible. But as long as she lets it stay in there and emerge on its own, it will heal the wound really nicely. And within a few days after the bots emerged, if I showed you this mouse again, you would be really surprised because you would think it had never had a botfly at all because the wound was just completely sealed. If she tries to chew this bot out, it can cause massive infection and do all sorts of damage. So the bot and mouse have kind of co-evolved for so many thousands of years that they somehow seem to know, don't mess with it and leave it alone. And rarely do you see a mouse try and chew one out. In some years, 80% of the white-footed mice will have a botfly like this. She's a young female, so I don't think she's pregnant. That's a good thing because the bot can sometimes shut down reproduction. Until the bot comes out, she can't give birth, so that can cause complications. But for the most part, the bots are in the mice when they really don't do much damage to the population and the mice have just learned to live with it. If the mouse leaves the spot fly intact, the bot will make a pretty big wound, about a 1/4-inch wound to crawl out. The spot will double in size from what you're seeing now. It'll get almost an inch long, and it will emerge and then pupate in the soil. If she lets that bot stay and emerge, it will heal itself within a few days afterwards. And in fact, people are actually looking at special antibiotic properties from the bot that may actually help suture and seal wounds. So what we need to maintain the health of the forest is to maintain the health of the mice and to have a really healthy population year after year after year.
Many other insects feed on oaks. Many also use oaks in a different way. They create specialized nurseries in them. We call these nurseries galls, and there are hundreds of different kinds, each one specific to a given insect species, mostly tiny cynnipid wasps. Galls are formed by the tree in response to the gall insect laying an egg in the leaf, bud, twig, or acorn tissues. Tiny cynnipid wasps feed on nectar and cannot sting. There are nearly 800 species in North America, most found on oaks. The gnat-sized wasps deposit hormone-like chemicals with their eggs, which cause the tree to grow a gall around the egg, providing it with a cozy home and food for the larva when it hatches. These are oak crown galls, formed by a fungus, but most galls are formed by insects. They vary greatly in shape, color, and size, and can be found on twigs, leaves, or fruit. The gall size and surface texture evolved to protect the larva within from other parasitoids injecting eggs into them. This is an oak plum gall. In the center, there is a tiny hardened capsule housing the larva. These fuzzy little orange galls are found on pin oak leaves. Oak apple galls are commonly formed on leaves or buds. The radial fibers are just long enough to put the larva out of the reach of an attacker's ovipositor. The larva pupates and matures into an adult. The adult wasp chews an exit hole through the gall. Some never make it out. The gall dries out, turns brown, and drops from the tree. But that might not be the end of its usefulness. A colony of those little temnothorax ants may use it now. People use galls too. Inks and dyes have been made from galls and iron since at least the 4th century. The Declaration of Independence and U.S. Constitution were written with gall ink. Oaks are vastly important to wildlife. Because of the hundreds of insect and other invertebrate species that associate with them, oaks are said to be the most important tree species to our breeding bird populations. Many birds rely heavily on invertebrate protein to grow their nestlings. Biologist Doug Tallamy found that oaks attract far more caterpillar species, and therefore the birds who eat them, than any other type of native tree. The oaks are keystone species, and without them, our springtime forests would be a lot quieter. In the mid-1800s, New England's traditional farms began a slow decline due to better prospects in the Midwest and migration toward industrialized urban centers. Great spreading solitary trees, typically oaks, that stood proudly in pastures became engulfed in second-growth forest. These so-called lone wolf trees can be recognized in the woods today by their open-grown form. Unlike the surrounding younger trees, they have stout trunks and low, spreading branches or lingering stubs. They've been shown to be hubs of activity for wildlife. These charismatic legacy trees are dying off as they find themselves in the shade of taller, younger forest. They're a symbol of New England's agricultural past, remnants of an open landscape and culture we will not see here again. Trees that grow up in the forest don't have this form with widely spreading limbs, so once these remaining wolf trees crumble to the forest floor, they'll be lost forever. But the return of our oak forests is a great benefit to us and the multitude of life forms that depend on them.